As civil society picks up the pieces in a post-COVID world, the last thing any of us need is a pandemic amnesty. Many of you may have seen by now the immense backlash that has occurred to a piece penned in The Atlantic by one Emily Oster, basically arguing for what is called a pandemic amnesty. Now, I read her entire piece, and in that piece, she basically says that there are a lot of errors made during the COVID-19 pandemic when it came to policy and when it came to the dissemination of certain knowledge relating to the virus. But a lot of those errors were made in goodwill. They were made, in her words, for the good of society. Therefore, we should simply forgive people who made erroneous conclusions and then move on and pick up the pieces. That's her basic thesis. This is basically what she's arguing. I'll have the article linked in the description down below for all of you who want to read it for yourself. But that's essentially the gist of it. Now, many people on Twitter have been responding rather angrily at this piece. Sydney Watson released a brilliant video when she said that she's not going to forget all the people who lost loved ones and weren't able to see them, people who were attacked by police for not abiding by legitimate lockdown orders, and all those other kind of things that were outgrowths of erroneous decisions made by the experts and then passed through the mechanism of political authority. She's not going to forget all of those things. And of course, many other Twitter users have followed suit in their sort of remembrance of everything that happened. But I think the idea of a pandemic amnesty is not only should it be really dismissed on those grounds, although those are pretty wise grounds. This idea of a pandemic amnesty also makes it very complicated for all of us in society to see where a lot of us went wrong in our thinking. Bad thinking will almost always produce incorrect results because thinking is the antecedent, the prerequisite for action, or at least it is for action that's rational. For irrational action, well, you get irrational acts by human beings. But yes, we have to locate the error in our thinking. And a pandemic amnesty actually stops us from doing that. In fact, that says that we should forget about dwelling on the past and just move forward. And that is not going to be good for us in terms of preventing another catastrophe like this in the future. My friends, instead of asking for a pandemic amnesty, we should instead ask for an amnesty for willful ignorance. There were many people in society who ordered their entire lives and the lives of those in their communities around the words of experts who were uncertain in their own recommendations, and those uncertain recommendations influenced policy, and that policy ended up doing a lot of very bad things. Why? Because the policy was short-sighted and based on erroneous ideas and many other reasons as well. But there were a lot of people who were willfully ignorant and did not want to investigate beyond their own presuppositions. It was believed that since certain orders were coming from government institutions, that they were therefore valid, when in all reality, the government is not any more valid than your average Joe off the street. The only thing that makes government valid is the authority government has, and that is it. Now, you expect someone who is an expert to make sound arguments, but again, the expertise of the experts was used to excuse unsound arguments. So, for example, the media, the corporate media writ large, during the COVID-19 situation, they dismissed every other non-official explanation for the origin of the COVID-19 virus as a conspiracy theory. I'll give you guys a little bit of a reminder right here from one of my favorite creators, Matt Olafo.
Fauci dismisses lab as source of virus. Ignore the conspiracy theories.
The conspiracy that coronavirus was man-made in a lab in Wuhan, China.
There is no reason to believe any of these conspiracy theories that it was leaked from the lab.
A theory that's almost certainly not true.
A conspiracy theory that the coronavirus originated inside a lab in China.
Like it was a conspiracy of some kind.
Lab wasn't source of virus. You can draw a line through it and say that it didn't happen. We know it didn't.
The Wuhan lab conspiracy theory.
Debunk conspiracy theory.
The fringe theory that the virus came from a lab in Wuhan, China.
Scientists debunk lab theory.
The conspiracy theory about COVID coming from a lab in Wuhan.
Oh my God, coronavirus came from Wuhan.
A conspiracy theory.
All right, so you guys see in this montage, the word conspiracy theory is used to dismiss any alternative explanation. Well, when you have just a narrow line of information being directed into the vectors of policy, and there are decisions being made off that information, but other alternatives are not being considered, you have an incomplete set of information, and you also have, by virtue of that, an incomplete and possibly flawed policy. Yet, this very simple fact was ignored because the experts, the sort of expertise of the experts was considered to be a value, and actually pursuing knowledge was not a value. And this is the second thing I think we need to declare amnesty for: the lack of humility. Willful ignorance is, by definition, a lack of humility. My friends, when you can dismiss alternative explanations that do not fit your biases or do not come from official sources as mere conspiracy theories and not consider anything else but those explanations, then oh my goodness, you are not being humble. You are not actually admitting to yourself that you could have something wrong, that your knowledge could have flaws in it. Very few things are known for certain. We can get a good probability of if something's true or not, but very few things are known for certain. And man, being a being of reason, has to operate in this world constantly discovering new things. If he doesn't, then the wisdom of his actions will be in question, because if you think you know everything, you will begin to act as if you know everything, and you will begin to act in ways that are destructive to not only society but yourself. Policymakers, thinking they knew everything, thinking themselves wise, created foolish actions that were destructive to society. Gavin Newsom decided to shut down churches in his state until he got rebuffed by the Supreme Court. And he decided to go after certain pastors who defied his orders. In Florida, in Louisiana, the same story played out. In the United Kingdom, there were churches who had to hold churches underground as if they were in a communist country trying to escape the glare of their authoritarian government simply because they refused to go by the orders that we now know lockdowns did nothing to stop COVID. We now know that the flawed orders that were deemed to be virtuous by virtue of the experts. The tyranny of experthood comes because humility was not embraced. When man embraces humility, he recognizes that reality is complicated and he does not know everything, and therefore he has to search as opposed to subjugate any other opinion that goes against his own. That's what we should declare amnesty for. Not for making errors, but for literally the kind of thinking that made those errors possible in the first place. You see, here's the problem with this pandemic amnesty idea. It looks at the effect, but it never addresses the cause. And a lot of the responses to the pandemic amnesty ideas also look at the effect, but they don't address the cause. Yes, locking down churches, the effect was bad. But how do we get to a point in our society where you could lock down and subjugate someone's ability to freely associate, a right that is as natural as their right to breathe and live without the interference of someone trying to stop that? Well, because we valued experthood, we valued a lack of humility more than we valued our own reason, more than we valued our own lives, more than we valued our own principles that many of us know to be true in our everyday lives. I'll get to that in a second. My friends, bad thinking can produce erroneous actions. And that's what we saw during the pandemic. In fact, the importance of humility in your thinking was actually displayed several times by Dr. Anthony Fauci during the various inconsistencies in his own policy. Fauci once said that masks weren't really effective. Then he said they were effective. That advice influenced policy. Fauci once said that, there was no need to shut anyone down and there was no need to, to do too much intrusive stuff. Then he said, we need to shut things down and do intrusive things. This, of course, led to schools being locked down and a lot of other things. The inconsistency in the narrative of the experts demonstrates how humility could have taken them a long way. How you don't know everything, and therefore you should act as if there are other possibilities. But not only that, but instead, a lot of society, this is the biggest problem, instead of entrusting themselves to maintain themselves, because as a first principle, you and I are the custodians of our own body, our own lives, and those around us. The government was entrusted. This is the third thing we need to declare amnesty from. We need to declare amnesty for giving the government the ability to manage a problem that is fundamentally personal in nature. COVID-19 did not, and still does not, act the same way with one person as does the other. COVID-19 had different effects on different people. Yes, there was a baseline, but COVID-19 impacted different people differently. Some folks got sick. I got sick. Other folks shrugged it off. Some people were asymptomatic. Again, it affected different people differently. And yet, the idea of public health, which is really an abstract idea, which destroys what health actually means, was used to justify tyrannical measures. It was used to justify things that were not only unnecessary, but are immoral for the government to carry out, because our thinking was erroneous. Again, cause and effect are what we need to look at. Not amnesty, not the effect. Cause and effect will free us from the pain that the policies during the pandemic caused, and it will prevent future pain. Also, there's another thing we can do. And this is going to sound rather simple, but it really isn't, unfortunately. It is, but it isn't. We can also reorient our vision towards something that has been ignored for quite recently. Towards common sense. Oh yes. Now, when I say common sense, I don't mean things that majority people agree on. Nope, that's not common sense. When I say common sense, I mean things that are accepted as truth, things that are accepted as a given by virtue of us existing in this world in the first place. Things that if they are not accepted as a given or as truth would make life irrational and incoherent. It would make life impossible to live. A philosopher of the Scottish Enlightenment, Thomas Reid, one of my favorite philosophers, wrote extensively about the problem of common sense. And in fact, he headed the Scottish School of Common Sense. And in his book, The Inquiry of the Human Mind and Respecting the Common Sense, he basically said that common sense are the principles that everything else in life require to exist. So, for example, I'll give you guys a clear example. What good is it to talk about food if you don't think food exists? If you think that food is fake, why would you talk about the kind of food you could eat to be healthy? And these are the kind of arguments that Reid was going up against in his day. There were people who asked the question, how do we know we exist? How are we sure we existed? Reid said, this is the wrong question. Because if you go through life asking these questions, wondering if you even exist, you will not be able to act as if you do exist. And if you don't act as if you do exist, you'll act destructively. Because again, if you don't exist, what's the purpose of acting in a rational manner? Reid said it is important to accept and to understand certain principles as givens. And these principles are not arbitrary. They are common sense because they are known and have been known throughout the ages. Reid said these principles have the consent of the ages, of the learned and the unlearned. That these principles are not just available to philosophers, they're available to the common man, and they are lived out by the common man. Common sense was put on an altar and sacrificed during COVID and in the process of the COVID-19 lockdowns, because there are certain principles that every man understands he has within him that need not be affirmed by anyone else except his own rational power. Every human being, by virtue of common sense, is free. Even if you don't believe you're free. The fact that you're watching me right now, the fact that you are able to act and control your limbs and your arms and walk, all these things presuppose that you are free. And if you think I'm not free, then all of your actions, your very act that you watch me right now, becomes incoherent. It becomes irrational. It makes no sense. So in order to explain anything, any of your actions, you have to presuppose you are free. You are living. If you don't believe you're living, then everything else becomes nonsensical and not necessary. These are common sense principles that many of you may even say, Christian, I know this stuff. What are you talking about? What I'm talking about is the fact that a lot of people sacrificed basic things that are required for us to operate rationally in this world for the voices and sentiments of experts and governments. People's families died. People had to hide underground when they went to church. People were attacked and derided as conspiracy theories for opposing alternate explanations to the origin of COVID. Now that we know is actually true, that it actually probably did come from a lab. People were called extremists for opposing lockdowns, looped in with the worst of the worst. And yet common sense says that man, by virtue of his existence, is a free agent. Common sense says man is the best person to take care of himself. Common sense says that if you begin to ignore other perspectives, you won't get a full picture of a situation. Common sense says if you're closed-minded, you'll get closed-minded results. Common sense says all of this. And Reed would be shouting from the rooftops about this. We need to get back to common sense. We need to get back to the fundamentals of our existence. And we need to ensure that the government and society affirm those, and they don't try to get rid of those by terrible policy informed by erroneous thinking. As opposed to a pandemic amnesty, let's get back to common sense, because common sense will always be the anchor that we need to make the best decisions possible in our own lives and in society as well. My friends, love you guys so much. Please be sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this video, comment on this video. Be sure to buy the Christian Watson merch. We got some nice merch out there that I'd like you guys to buy. It's on christianjwatson.com. Please be sure to, also, if you like this message a lot, please be sure to engage with me in the comments. I always like that. Be sure to engage, join my Discord if you'd like to. It's also in the comment section down below. My friends, love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.